Hello, and welcome to On Mute Now Podcast Season 3. We are four ladies on a mission to raise the volume on the conversations that matter. To those of you joining us on the live stream, thank you. You can join in on the banter and lively discussions across our social media and other podcast platforms. Are you ready? Let's go.
Hello, everybody. It's episode 9 out of 10. I am tired, but I'm happy. And if you're joining us tonight for the first time, man, you're late. But we're glad to have you. For our regular listeners, viewers, God, we thank goodness you've stayed with us for the long haul. Hello, Nikki. Nikki, you're
Hi,
fan
Nikki.
number
Okay,
one.
Nikki.
Huh? So this evening we have titled the episode "The Race Card." Already I'm getting a bit emotional. Apart from the Grinch, I guess I'm the most emotional on this podcast. I can go from 0 to 10. But anyway, the race card. The race card. I am your lead host this evening, Yolande. And this is the Unmute Now podcast. And with me, we have Natasha,
Hiya.
Angela,
Hi.
and Raquel is going to show up soon, sometime, we hope. Raquel, we're missing you. We're calling you out. Anyway, guys, so it's going to be a heavy conversation, but we're going to do our best. Before we get into the real chit chat, here's our tagline.
Raising the volume on the whispered conversations in our communities.
Raising the volume on the whispered conversations in our communities.
Raising the volume on the whispered conversations in our communities.
Raising the volume on the whispered conversations in our communities.
Unmute now. Raising the volume on the whispered conversations in our community.
So, what we've done is we've decided to play as many as we can tonight. All those that have been so good to us to have sent those in over the last 8 episodes. We've played as many as we can. I can't remember all the names, but Tara, Desiree, Nicole, Tia, thank you so much. If you hear any background noise, blame Angela. Blame Angela. But anyway, we're going to crack right on. And here is the first question I want to ask. And I'm throwing this out to the ladies as well as to you, our listening or viewing audience. If you can type into the chat, if you're here tonight, then that's what I mean. You have a chance to respond to this question. Have you ever been accused of playing the race card, and how did it make you feel? Or worse, have you ever felt really mistreated and afraid to speak up because of fear that you would have been accused of playing the race card? So it's one or the other. Or if you're being in a situation where you felt both ways, then sure, give it a go. Natasha?
Yes, it looks like it's me and you, Yolande. Angela popped out there for a second, so we hope.
Oh boy.
It's like the technology senses that we're near the end, so everything starts to happen. But we'll plug away. I can't recall personally being accused of playing the race card. However, I have witnessed instances of people accusing someone of playing the race card. And to me, it's normal. Those occasions in which I witnessed that, it was either online or maybe as a second hand, like I was there personally witnessing it. And it always seemed to me that in those occasions, the person who was doing the accusing didn't have a leg to stand on in the argument, or they couldn't refute what was being, stated by by the black person. And so they just went oh, you're playing the race card, because they didn't know how else to bring the argument to an end. And normally, if you were to hear that as a person of color, as a black person, you might be, what's the word I'm looking for? Flummoxed for a while. You might, get caught off guard because you're wondering, why in the world would you say such a thing? What is playing the race card? You know? So, not having personally dealt with it, but I have seen and witnessed it. And it normally, to me, comes from people who don't want to engage in the discussion, whether they feel uncomfortable having a discussion, or they don't know how to have the discussion, or they just don't believe in whatever the discussion is. They pull for that as a way of just ending the argument.
Okay, cool. I'm playing the devil's advocate, simply to say, I mean, obviously, racism on a whole is based on perception. And perhaps the person who is on the defense, who says you're playing the race card, might very well genuinely feel that they weren't attacking the other person because of race. I don't know. And obviously, that is a defense mechanism for perhaps, the other person who is accused of being offensive in some way linked to racism. But I wish that we had other persons here who might have been in a situation where someone would have accused them of being racist, or alluding to that, and they would have had to make a response, perhaps the very bold response of "you're playing the race card." But I don't think we have anybody here tonight who can boldly speak to that. I'm not sure. But anyway, Natasha, from my experience, just to chip in, and I'm going to read out the comments here on the chat as well. From my experience, I have actually been in situations, to be honest, where I have had colleagues or Black counterparts that have played the race card. And as again, I'm saying I'm playing the devil's advocate. So I've been and I've listened to situations where another Black person might have really got themselves in a bad situation, and simply their only offense or weapon would have been, is it because I'm Black? Is it because I'm Black? And that may or may not have been true. And in my mind, I would have been there standing thinking, dude, you're playing the race card here. Let's not do this. But really, is the race card a thing? I don't know. Let me just read one or two of the comments and we'll come back. So Nikki says, but they accuse us and don't always stop to think about unconscious bias. Perfect. That's a perfect way of looking at it. That generally, some people might very well be innocent in their intentions when they are the ones that are perpetrating certain behaviors, but that is rooted in unconscious biases. Like Nikki said, somebody else says, I get your point, Yolande. Many people treat you according to their racial bias without realizing it. Nikki says, that was from Denise, sorry. And Nikki says, I also think it occurs when there's clash of cultures. True. So that's why some people might say, it's not the race card, it's just personality clashes. And that, again, is another defense. Angela, you're back.
Gremlins at work. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So, Angela, I don't know if you have anything you want to add. We were just talking about the first point in terms of whether or not you've been in a situation where you yourself have been accused of playing the race card, or where you feel that you were in a situation where you were mistreated and felt, that you didn't want to speak up for fear of being accused of playing the race card, or even if you witnessed something like that.
Yeah, I've never been accused of it, but I certainly had a situation where I spoke up, but I didn't speak up. Well, where I was basically mistreated, right, in the workplace setting, just kind of very earlier on in my career, and I spoke up, but I didn't attach it to race, even though I clearly felt it was race. But I didn't attach it to it because, I didn't want to be accused of playing that race card, or you're just being too sensitive, or you're just being. So I just kind of raised it in different ways. But I knew for a fact what it was, but I felt unable to actually say it. I wasn't that bold at that stage, in my career. So yeah.
Well, I'm sure you've grown.
Oh, yeah.
Well, here is another thing I want to add. To be honest, I generally don't think that there are many people out there, maybe, our, the white majority population or other races, who might boldly say, you're playing the race card. But what I do recognize is you get a lot of roll eyes. You get a lot of silent
Yes.
communication of very much the same.
Yes.
I have had that experience. So I would be the one who
Yes.
I would be the one who would say, are you trying to tell me that something here? But here's a fact. I have actually written a very formal letter to an employer. And in that letter, I have said certain things. For example, I have made references to unconscious biases. I've made reference to white fragility. And the employer simply came back, I will not accept that this organization is racist. Well, I wasn't saying you were racist. I was making certain
Yeah.
concerns or expressing certain concerns
You
with
can
certain
hardly
types
say
of
anything
behaviors.
before you're accused. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes,
But
Natasha,
even
go for
that
it.
statement, but even that response, I will not accept that this organization is racist. Even that response in itself says so much, because
Yes.
you clearly have put yourself on a pedestal where you think we've got it sorted, and quite frankly, that's arrogance at best, and ignorance at worst. And then also it's just that sort of, total, we will not talk about it. I don't even want to know what your concerns are. Let's not even I mean, it's just like, no, we're not talking, talk to the hand kind of thing.
That's
Yeah.
exactly how I felt. Sorry,
Sorry,
Natasha.
so I was just gonna, because Angela reminded me of something. But then you'll have the approach when it's time to put out the promotional material for the organization, and then they want to trot out all the people of color on the promotional material. We're so diverse, we're so this, we're so that, and it's just to say, if you value us, to put us on your promotional material to show that you're diverse, value our opinions and the things that we say when we bring it to you in a sincere manner. It's not necessarily being accusatory. We're just saying, I think that these things exist within the work, within my work environment. I'm not saying it's a racist work environment. They're just things that I can tell you from my point of view that this is what this is, and you guys should probably have a look at that.
And you're both right, because I totally felt shut down and disappointed. And all I wanted was to be invited to a conversation. But that's fine. We're going to move on. I'm going to read. Denise says, Nikki, says, oh, yeah, I had one experience during my clueless days. So I laughingly argued that I had every reason to get away with something because of my race. No one laughed. I later discovered that it was politically incorrect. Right? Well, anyway. So here is something else I want to just throw out here as a question, and then we just move it right on. So for you ladies, we're going to show a piece of artwork very soon. And this artwork, let me just preempt what it is about. This is an artist. There was a call out for UK artists to make a piece of artwork that sort of placed the whole concept of playing the race card on its head. And let me just show you this piece of artwork first before we get into any further discussion. James, if you may bring up this piece. And the artist goes under the name Made by Nicole. Now, if you notice, let me just talk you through it very quickly. So if you notice, there are two hands there, a white hand and a black hand. The black hand holds the cards: slavery, prison, oppression, Black Lives Matter, systemic racism. And the white hand holds the cards: privilege, supremacy, all lives matter, Trump, I can't see one of them, colonization, and also holds the race card, which appears to be the Trump card in the white hand. What do you guys in the audience, if any, make of this piece of artwork first? Does it change your views about what we just talked about? So, for example, the fact that the race card is in the white hand, does it change any of your views that you've just expressed? Natasha?
James, if you could bring back up the image of the race cars again. I was just going to say, I'm not sure how many card players are in the audience there, or watching, or might be listening to us. But for those who are listening, the black hand is holding a 3, 5, 6, 7, and a jack, and the white hand is holding 2, 8, 10, jack, queen, and a king, as well as the race card. So even just looking at that, the denomination on the cards for the black hand are of a lower value, and the cards that the white hand is holding are the higher suite of cards as well.
See, I'm not a card player. Thanks, Natasha. And then further to that, Nikki adds, further to that, which is a very good observation, the black hand is also shackled in chains. Very
Yeah.
good. So
Yeah.
I don't know. And then, so that speaks to the symbolisms. I get it, Nikki. Thank you so much. I wonder, really, does it change your views? Camille says, and the black hand is bound. But in terms of the race card, does it change anything? Natasha, Angela, feel free to chip in.
James, you want to bring back up the image
Yeah.
again? Please. Yes, it also looks as if the white hand is the one that is dealing the cards, right? So the white hand is dealing the cards to the black hand, and then still in the middle is showing the card that says race. So it's giving the like basically insufficient tools. It's giving a lesser hand, but then complaining that that you're using the black card. You're complaining against the oppression that you're facing, but the hand with the highest cards is the hand that is really oppressing the other hand.
Wow.
For
And
those who are
somebody says
listening,
the white.
sorry, Yolanda. For those who are listening, it's hard to picture. But if you Google "race cards" made by Nicole, you can have a look at it and examine it more closely. Go ahead, Yolanda.
Okay, somebody says, and again, it's depicted two white hands where it's only depicting one black hand, which again probably symbolizes power. I don't know. But there's so many interpretations to this piece of artwork.
Yeah. I was going to say, Yolande, so even though Black people get accused of playing the race card, I think what the artwork really shows is that that race card is actually in the hand of the white person. And so it is the white person in that artwork that's actually playing the race card. So it's actually not something that's in the hands of a Black person to play. It's the white person that gets to say, "Oh, you're playing the race card." So in a reverse way, it becomes their benefit. It becomes their tool, as opposed to the accusation that the Black people are using it as a tool. It's actually in the hands of the white person to shut down the Black person. Once they say you're playing the race card, they've actually played the race card and used it to silence you. That's what I see.
You have a bit, you kind of just went very, very well at the end, Angela. You kind of went a bit of a blur in what you were saying, but we got the point. And Angela, you are exactly correct. That was what the artist's explanation at the end, in so many words that we can't read it all out. I think that's what the artist wanted to depict. And so for many of us, when I actually saw that piece of artwork, it completely blew me away and changed my entire perception about the race card. And I'm sorry that that has happened so late in my life, because in my mind, I was always fearful of being accused of being use the race card. But now I am very much prepared that wherever anybody, accuses me of playing the race card, I'm boldly saying, "You're the one playing the race card," in those very simple words. And I feel confident to be able to do that because somebody else has articulated it perfectly in art and as well as in words.
Nikki makes a valuable point here in the chat. She says, it's also about access. It's not just about power, it's about access. So very good.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just right.
I don't know. Nikki is brilliant with this. She says, because she can also see the backdrop of a slave ship. I didn't even notice that in the piece of artwork, but cool. So there's so much to go on. But anyway, so I didn't tell you at the beginning, but tonight what we're also going to be doing is that we're going to be introducing a bit about the work of our funders. Now, this season, I don't know if anybody stick right to the end and whoever watches the credits. Nobody does that. But we have had at the very end of our podcast, Resourcing Racial Justice logo. And that is because for this season, we've been funded by PRISM through Resourcing Racial Justice. And we have had the opportunity, the privilege of having them answer a couple of questions for us, which we're going to show you in video recording before we even give away anything about who they are, other than the name, Resourcing Racial Justice.
So the first question we've been asked to consider is, what is your view on playing the race cards? Shazan, I was just thinking a lot about why we started RRJ, and I remember at the start of the pandemic how obvious it was to all of us the kind of racial inequalities that we were about to see. Like, we didn't need to see those stats that came out around the number of like people of color that were dying disproportionately, because we already knew that was going to happen. And I think what was really interesting about that time was like funders were still too afraid, even though we knew where communities were going to need money most, when we knew this pandemic was going to hit certain communities most, funders were still too scared, I think, to name race or be explicit about race. And RRJ was created before the BLM uprising, so it was a really different time. And so, yeah, when I think about playing the race card, I think about just actually how at that point of time people were like afraid to talk about race. And as you said, race is so far removed from conversations around funding. And that's really surprising, especially when we look at where philanthropic money comes from, right? Where does wealth come from? It comes from the exploitation of countries around the world. It's deeply linked to slavery. And it's brilliant that we're having these conversations now. But yes, just kind of those are the things that come to mind for me, but how we don't talk about race enough. So, and when we do, people are afraid, like they always think like, oh, suddenly it's an unfair advantage. For some reason, trying to have conversations about race or trying to work towards equity always makes people afraid around, yeah, unfair advantages, which is quite the opposite.
Right. Okay. I thought there was a small video that introduced who they are really. That was a played, so we'll just skip that, and I'll tell you. Those two ladies are Nusrat and Fazana, and they would have started this project, this organization called Resource and Racial Justice, just really for I think a year or two, to simply prove to the philanthropic industry how this should be done, how it is possible to direct money from philanthropists to resource and racial justice projects. And the fact that they were bold enough about that was something else. And they'll talk a bit more about that. So the first question we would have asked them to sort of input into was their thoughts about the race card. And that's what you've heard. Ezekiel, you're welcome. We're happy to see you tonight. We've missed you 1 or 2 episodes. Ezekiel says, as they say, race is not an issue until an issue is made out of it. So if the supreme hand only dishes to the black hand the lower deck with less opportunities, then that clearly defines it all. Well said, Ezekiel. So here is the question, first of all, before we play the rest of the video, the remainder of the video from Resource and Racial Justice, who we call RRJ for short. Do you guys actually think that the philanthropic industry could be racist intentionally or unintentionally? What are your views?
I'll jump in while the audience or live commenters think about it as well. I think that some philanthropic organizations could be unintentionally racist. There have been some organizations who are known to have a sort of paternalistic attitudes towards minority-run funding organizations, where they think that they might not know how to manage their own resources, or they don't give them all the funding at once. They parcel it out in bits. For whatever reason, they think maybe there'll be lack of transparency, or that they just won't know how to handle themselves. So while they might not be outwardly thinking they're racist, they could unintentionally be exhibiting racist attitudes towards minority-led organizations. I know that for a fact.
And I think Denise is really onto something. Denise asks a question which I would think is actually a rhetorical question, because RRJ is really going to speak to this. Denise says, where does philanthropic money come from again? And I suppose that says it all. But Nikki says, and sometimes when they're done managing, they get the money back in processing the monies. Not sure I clearly understand the point, but maybe you can explain it, Nikki. So, Angela, you're back. The question when seriously,
there's a child who gave me in and out the window, Mezu. That is Angela.
You see, next week, I'm gonna preempt it now. I'm gonna really be calling next week Wilding Out, because I'm gonna be remembering all the crazy things that happened for the past 10 episodes. It's where we're gonna be taking the mick, as they say in Northern Ireland, out of each other.
Oh,
Natasha, you be
God.
prepared, because I have a lot coming for you next week. anyway, anyway, Angela, the question was whether or not you think philanthropy or the philanthropic industry could be intentionally or unintentionally racist.
Well, let me take a different angle on this. And it really goes to what I think was it Nikki that said, where does philanthropic money come from again? In
That was
many
Denise.
ways, was that Denise? That was Denise. Okay. So let me take it from this angle. You know, some of the things that we see in terms of charities being philanthropic and helping and so on and so forth, even in the way that images are depicted, it betrays a view and a perspective on those that they are trying to help. So, for example, when we're talking about things like cancer, people are given dignity. But when you're talking about a famine somewhere in a country in Asia or a country in Africa, there's no dignity afforded to those people that you're seeking to help. And that in itself, I think, you know, requires people to think about, what are we doing here? Why are we doing it? What's the thinking behind this? What's the motivation behind this? What's the heart behind this? And so as to whether or not they are intentionally or unintentionally racist, let me answer it by saying, I think even the thinking behind it, even the perception of the people.
Oh dear, and her
goodness.
point was sounding, you know, she's making a. Oh, here she's back. Yes, we got you the perception. Yes.
Yeah, so there are those issues around stereotypical views of those that you're trying to help, prejudice and bias towards those that you're trying to help, even though you say you're trying to help. But what's behind that is problematic. So let me just put it that way. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's that issue. I think is problematic in that you're wanting to help because we want to show that we are the savior. I think there's an element of that. There's that what they call the white savior syndrome. You know, there's that element of wanting to help. Now, having said all of that, do we not want philanthropy? Of course not. Of course we do. Of course we do. But we still have to recognize that this is problematic in some ways.
Right. Okay. I'm going to drop my comment in, but I'm reading a few from the chat. Nikki says we need another episode for this. And her previous comments when she explained was that she's referring to the fact that the philanthropic community would need audits, they need reports, they need to teach you how to spend money, and all the people that they that are hired by them. So very little actually goes to the recipient. And that's Nikki's view. Now, my view really has to do with, you know, it's sometimes the philanthropic community need to recognize that a lot of times when applications are being fronted for work that are, you know, representative of racial justice projects, a lot of those applications could be fronted by maybe white folks, for want of a better word. And sometimes we in the Black community tend to complain that we have made applications to do similar work, but we weren't given the funding, maybe perhaps because we don't have the kind of profile that perhaps maybe a white-led organization might have to put forward. And is that fair that we are perhaps not given the opportunity to represent ourselves or to tell our own stories? And so I think that sometimes the philanthropic community kind of need to recognize that might be an issue, and where you really need to put the money is in the hands of the people to help themselves. Now that's my view. So I'm going to just
Yolanda,
sorry,
just
Natasha,
to say quickly.
Go for it.
Oh, sorry, Angela. I was just going to say before I lost my point, just to follow on to what you're saying there, Yolanda. And sometimes you'll find instances where the funding will be given to a white-led nonprofit organization to carry out projects that benefit, quote unquote, minority-led organizations, and they don't have an in into that community. And then they therefore now have to liaise with the Black or minority-led community to get that project done. But the project name and funding goes under them, and the minority funding is the one that's actually doing the work.
And going even further than that, I thought you were going to go that far. Maybe you chose to hold back, but I'm not holding back on this one. Even further to that, when they liaise with these Black or ethnic minority organizations, those organizations end up doing the work, right? They actually do the work. But the white-led organization got the money. The Black or ethnic minority organizations do the work for them, and then they go and report on it, and they don't get paid for it. So there's that as well that the philanthropic community needs to understand is going on underneath all of that.
Okay. Thank God Raquel hasn't showed. Thank God Raquel hasn't showed up.
This one is close to the chest.
Raquel hasn't showed up yet. I believe she might be having technical issues, but you know what? We're glad because I know Raquel feels very strongly about this. So listen, I'm sure we've all spoken for her. James, the final video from RRJ, because they have spoken in light of a similar question to this.
I guess it's time maybe for us to talk a little bit about resourcing racial justice. We set up at the start of the pandemic. We're not funders, and we were able to pull together very, very quickly through relationships that we had with funders who knew that they wanted to support this kind of work, but also knew that they didn't have those relationships and weren't best placed to work and get money to the communities that needed it most. We were able to pull together £1 million. We also pulled together more than £100,000 from a crowdfunder as well, which we moved towards different communities of colour. We had 1,400 applications of incredible work around the country, and we were able to support 59 different projects, and that included registered charities, community charities, but also included unregistered groups, so movements, organisers, and like those sorts of organizations that aren't formally charities find it very, very hard to access money. There's not many funders that will fund them. So there was a lot of incredible kind of impact we were able to make there. And we also funded individuals. So we funded just incredible people on the ground that were doing work. We tried to also fund things that people usually didn't fund. So we asked people to apply for funding for rest, because if we also know about like the levels of kind of burnout and the culture of burnout we have within our communities and the way that we work, and we just wanted to really change what the idea of like resource was. Fazana, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that as well about what we set out to do and the kind of projects we supported.
I think you articulated, how much this was an emergency response, and we were, a bunch of community organizers, activists, people, artists, people whose background isn't in philanthropy, but this wide set of commitments around this project of making sure that resources were going towards racialized communities who are disproportionately impacted, and how we might build equity and a vision for economic justice more broadly. What I think when we set out to do in the immediate pandemic was to redistribute resources and kind of invest in our communities, while this strategic divestment is happening through austerity and all of these other things, not just the pandemic. What we also ended up engaging in is finding kind of new methods and apparatus and processes and systems, some of which worked and some of them, we still have to finesse and iterate around how do we actually move money in the direction of racial justice when you've got a really hostile infrastructure that locks money out of Black and global majority people's communities and projects and enterprises. And so I think that that's the stuff that also was a really, I think, innovative and exciting byproduct. It wasn't an intended outcome, but we think it's something that all of the different ways people invested and joined us in the journey of resourcing racial justice can feel really proud of as part of the legacy that we have, and some new tools that we get to kind of offer to the broader work of resourcing racial justice on a sector level, on a movement level, and then on a kind of more long-term vision of economic democracy and justice. That's, the biggest vision of like, how does that practically happen? And figuring out some of that stuff, like, Nusrat and I would have these meetings, and we say it's like a bit like surgery, where you're like sitting down and figuring out how do you actually make something that's deemed unfundable because risk is racialized actually fundable. So yeah, I think that's something that also became part of our trajectory, and legacy too.
Amazing. So I think this is where we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much for inviting us to be on the show, and we're also so privileged to be supporting UK Pivot's incredible work. So thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
We also feel very privileged to have been supported by RRJ and Prism. It was absolutely a pleasure working with them. So listen, guys, we have gone way over because this episode, as Ezekiel said in the chat, we had to pour it all out. So this particular episode,
have more to pour.
and we still have a lot more, but we have to cut it because we've gone way over than the normal half an hour, and we're glad that you've stayed with us, guys. And next week it's a wrap, it's a finale. We're gonna have some surprises. We're gonna even have some of you, one of you at least, from our audience listening, viewing, that will be live with us, and that will be exciting.
Looking forward to that.
We can't wait. Any final thoughts, ladies, quickly before we go?
Just send us your taglines if you haven't yet. We'd love to have that. That would be a nice big blast. A way for us to end our third season. So send those in to us on social media or to our emails that you will see right there on your screen as well.
Yeah, and don't miss next week. Looking forward to seeing you all and hearing you all.
Hey, Joe, I can't believe you're just coming in because you missed this. I'm sure this would have been straight up your street.
Joe.
Next week, and we've got some big things on the horizons as well. We're doing other things, as you guys know, but we're not going to keep you. We're going to love you and leave you. We're going to say goodbye from us at Unmute Now podcast, and we will see you next week. Hopefully, keep raising the volume, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to our On Mute Now podcast. If you would like to be in on our conversations live, follow us on our social media platforms during our live broadcasts. We are at Unmute Now 1 on Twitter and at Unmute Now on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, and on your favorite podcast platforms. Like, follow, and rate us on Apple Podcasts and leave us a voice message on Anchor. Like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube channel. If you want to raise the volume on something or contact us, email onmutenow1@gmail.com. Unmute now.